more late night thoughts from me. It's quite nice having a programme where I don't have to be on camera. It's because I've got my iPad working again, and I can do this again while I'm lying in bed and my brain starts working overdrive. Because I'm not somebody who sleeps easily. And actually, this whole YouTube channel originally started out as being bedtime stories for fellow insomniacs. Well, today I had a treat because a podcast I did with Rudolf Berger of Thoth Hermes came out today, and it was we spoke a couple of weeks ago, and it was such a treat because I don't normally get to speak to anybody else about my not speaking directly. I mean, I write to quite a few people, but it was really nice to be able to just talk to somebody about the work I've been doing and the emetasis of the Silver Age Russia, who I work with, and Valentin Tomberg, of course. And serendipitously, perhaps, this same morning I had a lovely message from Robert Powell, who's the publisher of Meditations on the Tarot in English, and he runs really wonderful courses about eurythmy and the Sophia tradition, Meditations on the Tarot itself, of course, Astro-Sophie, a kind of form of spiritual astrology that he's devised, all kinds of things. And I had this lovely email from Robert, who I've not spoken to in quite a while. I think the last time I saw him was in Assisi at one of his courses, which was fantastic. But so today I've had a little kind of flurry of activity catching up with people, and one or two names from, I don't want to say the past because these people are still known to me, but I don't hear from them very often. And kind of a small rallying, perhaps, of people from this great tradition that we work within. But everybody is so scattered, and it's just made me think, as I was lying here, that it's like almost for me anyway, a kind of a Christian hermetic community in diaspora. And I don't know if anybody else feels like that, because maybe for people in America, the community, there's kind of other members who are closer by, so they can meet in the physical and have lodges and churches, or perhaps in Germany, Switzerland, places, anthroposophists obviously have places they can meet. But for me, the people that I really connect with, including those in Britain and in England, they're not physically that close to me. So even if I think about my the one group that I'm kind of really a part of in an initiatory sense, which is the Company of the Inner Abbey, which is within the Avalonian tradition, going back to Dion Fortune, Gareth Knight, and then the lineage holder from Gareth Knight, who went by the mystery name of John Porter, and he was my mentor. He's also an Anglican priest, a wonderful person, but we don't meet up personally. And I have met the new head of this order, Tom. We've managed to meet up at Hawkswood for the first time this year, and it was just amazing to meet Tom and his wife Sue, because we never get to meet. We email, and I have these email correspondences with other wonderful people around the world. There's too many to really name from the top of my head, but we've got people like Alice in America, Alice Despard and her group, and we're just like soul sisters, myself and Alice. There's Stephen Tynan, Anastasia, who I've never met. There was Charles Salvo before he died, sadly, in Florida. Robert himself, who's living in South America. who I see every few years if I'm lucky. There's Michael France in Australia, or is it New Zealand? Down under anyway. Other people in Canada, people in Europe, Scotland. There's Paul Weston in Glastonbury. There's so many others from the old Yahoo group that was working with Valentin Tomberg material, and they're all around the world, and I really don't hear from many of those people. Stephen now and again, if I'm lucky, from his place in San Francisco. And then the sort of great people who comment on my YouTube channel and perhaps read some of the books or read the articles on academia. And I just want to say, I suppose, thank you to all these people just for being there. The work that I'm doing is, for the most part, very solitary, out of necessity. That's the work of the hermit for you. It is a solitary work. Even though I don't live alone, I live with my partner of many years, Denra. We've been together almost 23 years, but he's not interested in this sort of work, which in one way is good because it keeps me grounded in earth and means I have to live in the real world. But in another respect, it's really challenging to maintain what's needed to do really concerted spiritual work. It's much more straightforward if you have a partner who's also doing that work. I don't have that, so in this respect I am a true hermit. And so every little comment that gets made or email that's sent to me, every message, it really does mean something to me, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate having a network of fellow travellers from all points of the globe, like these little candles that are lit in all these distant places. And I think of you. And when I do prayers, sometimes I do rounds of people around the world who I know are doing spiritual work. Ramon, of course, wonderful Ramon, who does pray for other people and remembers people in his prayers. Appreciated and loved by so many people, I know he is. But there's others as well that I've not named, but that doesn't mean they're forgotten. And perhaps following on a little bit from the recording I made last night, which was talking about the generations, not just my generation, Generation X, but also the millennials coming up behind us, Generation Z behind them. And if it was difficult for Generation X, it's nothing compared to what millennials and Gen Z are having to deal with now in the age of deception in this world. And they're on the coalface of this struggle. I do believe they'll reap great spiritual rewards and that they do have their blessings in heaven. Maybe they haven't experienced that yet. I'm absolutely certain that it will come. Maybe sooner rather than later as well. But these are precious people because these are the future. And it's always easier for old fogies and older people to say, to get grumpy about younger generations, especially when the music is so terrible. As I can't help thinking, not all of it, of course, but so much of it is. But they're facing, everybody has their spiritual challenges, each generation, and some generations had to go to war, which is about as bad as it gets in many ways, although on the other hand, war does bring out the best in people in the sense that they have to come together, and it can bring out a certain nobility of spirit in those who are called upon to make this a sacrifice and to be charged with holding the flag and the forecastle of their nations. I pray this isn't going to happen to anyone anytime soon that I know, even though it's already happening to people in other parts of the world. But nevertheless, I do think that whilst they might not be called directly to war in the West, our younger people and our millennials and our Gen Zs, they really are walking through dark times, and although they will receive their rewards from the angels and from the Lord, I do think that a bridge and an olive branch where necessary perhaps, and a solidarity needs to be built between that generation and my generation and those older than me, the beatniks and the 60s kids and even the boomers. The boomers shouldn't leave everyone behind. It's because they've made it, because we really are coming into, I don't want to call it the final struggle, that sounds apocalyptic, but I do think in many respects we are in apocalyptic times, and times that the prophets throughout the ages and throughout different faiths taught about, that we're in the kind of end of history. We're at that point beyond which psychic impressions for a long time didn't go past this point, because it's such a culmination point. And what we're seeing is kind of concerted attempts on the part of, let's call them archons, because it's an understandable term for people engaged in our work. Let's call them archons, the earthly archons, who want to really, really divide us. I spoke about this last night. Not just along racial lines or things to do with gender and sexuality, or just between men and women. Also between rich and poor, between people's political preferences, which really is a terrible thing to fall out about when it comes down to it, when you think how bad all of politics is. That's so not worth us being divided over, when that's what the goal is, to keep us divided and under control. But I do believe the archons also want to separate off the younger people. And the reason for this is quite basic. They always say follow the money. And of course the younger people, they're going to be the real earners. They're the economic force in no small part of today, but also of tomorrow when it comes to Gen Z. So they want to make sure they have control of this economic force, and to channel it in the directions they want us to go. Now, if you listened last night, I referred to some trend presentations that bothered me because, and this wasn't brought out by the presenters, who were very insightful actually. There are some ladies working for Scarlet Opus, a Northern English trend forecasting agency, and incredibly insightful about what they're seeing now from the millennium generation, and talking about the youth movement and the protest, the spirit of protest, and the nihilism and the dissatisfaction with society, the desire to make a change. But what I think that they didn't really grasp was the fact that this generation is being kind of forced down a road that the technocratic archons of our world want them to go down. So this isn't a counterculture. So whereas in the past, youth have been able to perhaps have some genuine freedom, even though I accept criticism that was made earlier in that, the authorities, the archons, have always tried to control youth movements and co-opt them for their own purposes. There's always been an element that has kind of understood this and has genuinely resisted. And I do believe our millennials, also the ones that are clued up, genuinely want to resist themselves, but they've been forced down the valley of the shadow of death. And the contrasting trend for my generation, Generation X, was of realists who, because we have this connection with an earlier time, pre-social media, and on the cusp, but also just before the age of deception, when we still had incredible role models and genuine living icons in the world, in the form of Princess Diana, Pope John Paul II, for example. Even people like Reagan and Gorbachev and Margaret Thatcher, whilst they're politicians, and you can make, say bad or good things about any of them, they were still great figures. They were, the people we have in politics were really pygmies, really, in comparison to these people, who, for better or worse, were leading the Western world. And we also had great musical icons, the bands that we had, people that we could genuinely look up to, and real talent, whereas a lot of what's being forced down people's throats now, I'm not saying that there's a complete lack of talent out there. Obviously there are very talented people, but the way the music industry has gone, and to some extent the film industry, it's just all, it's become, everything's being corrupted and taken over at this corporate level. And this is the appeal, I suppose, I'm making is to my guys in the Generation X and those older, is to let's really link hands with the millennials and form a bridge, and not let them be dragged down the road that the old cons want them to go down, because there's a great weight of history of people engaged in spiritual work and esoteric work, and of looking beyond the veil, and of meditating and praying, and dealing with the enemy and the machinations of the enemy. And we can still provide a lifeline for those who might feel lost, or that they're just becoming sucked into this vortex or vacuum, or what Rudolf Steiner described as the eighth sphere. Well, we're not going to go there. Okay, we're not going to go there. We're going to follow the light and the star of Hermeticism, and nobody's going to be forgotten, and nobody's going to be left behind, and the good times, they will come again. And that's my thought for tonight. Thank you. Good night.